podcast about gun rights and gun laws in the country. We're talking about being pro-gun ownership and what would happen if they were to be banned. Banning guns goes against the Second Amendment, which protects the right of people to keep and bear arms. Gun rights provide self-defense and many other things, like such as support. If they were to be banned, criminals would continue to get guns by other criminals, and we would be basically supporting those who are selling them. This is similar to when they banned alcohol during the Prohibition. They just found other ways to get it, and that is what they would do if guns would be banned.
Yeah, and piggybacking off that, I've heard a lot of people in recent times talking about trying to push the gun buyback program like they did in Australia and Europe. And honestly, some research shows it actually didn't do anything. That the crime rates and homicide rates in those places fell at the exact same rate before the gun buyback program. And also, it wouldn't work in the United States because the Second Amendment is in our Constitution. It's what our culture is. And so trying to take that out would just be changing our entire culture, and it just wouldn't work. And also, like you said, if you do the gun buyback program, the only way they're going to know if you have guns is if it's registered. And people who register guns are safe with guns, and they have guns to protect their family. Yeah. So you're honestly just taking away guns from people who want to protect themselves from a tyrannical government or from other people causing them harm.
Exactly. So. And guns are just as well a self-defense item. They are like the first steps in defending yourself from a bad situation would be to run or hide and escape. And if that doesn't work, your best option is to fight back. But if you don't have a gun and they do, the chances of survival are pretty slim. Quoted from a veteran in Iraq, he said that America has a crime problem. It does not have a gun problem. This gun is a tool, not a terror. In the right hands, it's an instrument of peace and justice. It protects life and stops attacks. It's an antidote to fear and helplessness, and we cannot allow hysteria to prevent us from exercising our inherent right of self-defense.
And yeah, I agree. It's a really good self-defense item, and specifically to mention sort of the sitting duck situation, the analogy. And I feel that applies not only to defending yourself from criminals, but as Leon said, kind of defending yourself from, tyranny, because I think at some point there's some sort of dialectic that indicates that all empires lead to a dictatorship at some point, and you either find some way to overcome that, or you lead a pretty nasty empire for however long. And I think if you're taking guns away, even hypothetically, the gun buyback program does work, which like Leon said, I don't think it would, because of the very real gun culture that exists in America that is not present in other countries. Hypothetically that does happen. I think you're really only hurting the people and not necessarily defending them very much by any means.
Yeah.
Sorry, dealing with a little bit of a cold, but and then on top of that, I think stepping on any specific right that is outlined by the Constitution or the Bill of Rights is particularly dangerous, because if there's something that can be taken away, I feel there's much more that. I know it's sort of a slippery slope argument, but I really do believe that those rights are sacred, and I think if you're taking one away, there is potential to take more, and that becomes a very serious issue.
Exactly.
Exactly, and it is an issue, and going back to what Danny said, it's it's right. We have a crime problem. We don't have a gun problem. These people that are mentally ill, and these public places aren't being defended, or aren't being the security isn't being enforced as it should. within these areas, and maybe we need to have a new standard for that. But the issue isn't taking away the guns; it's dealing with with these mentally ill people as well as securing these dense populated areas.
Exactly. And a lot of the mass shootings that have happened recently have all been in areas where it's a gun-free zone, where the attacker knows that there is no chance, like there's a low chance that someone's going to fight against back from them, which allows them just to do more harm than anything, which is really fucked up, because it just proves that banning guns it won't help anything. It just won't help anything. It'll just make things more difficult.
Yeah, I agree, and it's just it creates it just damn, sorry, losing my train of thought. I also think it's dangerous because along with that idea of like these mass shootings are taking place in gun-free zones, I'd also like to point out that I think like a lot of these people would have passed so-called common sense gun right like background checks. A lot of these people had no criminal history, had no long history of like, psychological problems. I mean, you look at the Las Vegas shooting, extremely deadly. There's almost no motive that can be found because he was like apparently, I mean, quote unquote sane. Obviously I'm using that pretty loosely, but there's only so much you can really prevent, and I don't think you're preventing very many mass shootings from stopping, because a lot of these people are not necessarily on the grid as sociopaths or psychopaths.
Right.
Yeah, and the controversy of these mass shootings in recent years has mostly led to questioning of our gun laws, and that's really where this conversation starts. I mean, take for instance the school shootings, which lead the most gun reform laws. Blacksburg, Virginia, Parkland, Florida. I mean, those are massive high school shootings, and they account for some of the highest death tolls, which I mean we can all agree is unacceptable, and action needs to be taken on these issues. But they're looking in the wrong direction. I mean, they're looking at the guns and they're trying to push their own agenda, their own anti-gun agenda, rather than looking at issues that will actually solve these problems. I mean, take for instance, I mean, they should be pushing policies as developing mental health evaluations, for kids, middle, through high school, and they should also be providing funding to create a higher level of security and in these areas, or provide more officers on campus, because and they don't push these policies, and the reason why, I mean, they're pushing their own anti-gun agenda, which does not work, especially in the United States. Mass shootings could end tomorrow if they focused on different issues, such as what I just mentioned, mental health, and the security of these public places.
I personally feel that if a school shooting, they have the rules where you all are supposed to get under the table and hide in the classroom if someone were to enter, and if you were just allowed to carry guns and there was a teacher who had a gun, they could easily go out there and defend themselves, rather than having all the students and teachers wait for the police and everything and just sit there and hoping the shooter doesn't shoot down the door and come in. Because I feel like if you had a gun, it could fix things in a quicker manner.
Yeah, and going off that, back at home, I think I'm getting the high school correctly, but there's a high school in my area. I think it's Allen High School or Argyle High School. I'm not sure 100%. But one of those two, in the school, teachers actually are armed with guns. No one knows who those teachers are, but there are a handful of teachers armed with guns, and they do have training regularly with those. Yeah. And I know, I'm not 100% sure on the what do you call the legislation on that. If it's if they want a military background or any type of police force background. if there's a certain type of background they want. But I feel like that would be the best case of action, is to have some prior service background because they're more comfortable situations with that.
Definitely.
So, and those high school that high school that has that back at home, they don't have any problems with people walking in with guns at school and trying to shoot up a school. So
Yeah, because they know how to use the gun.
well, yeah, and the person that's gonna shoot up a school, they're gonna go to a place that they know that they're not gonna get harmed back. There's not gonna be someone fighting back at them. So just that mental deterrence right there is gonna slow down a bunch of attackers. And of course, there's gonna be some people that's just gonna say fuck it and they're gonna go do it, and they don't care about the consequences. But I feel like majority of people, if there's a physical deterrence of like, hey, I could get seriously injured, or there could be someone that can fight back, they're gonna think twice about it, and there's a higher chance of them not doing it.
Yeah, I see your point.
Yeah, I kind of want to go back to real quick the sort of culture of like we don't spend enough on like mental health, and because I really agree with that, and that was one of the points I wanted to bring up, was that I feel like the larger issue is not necessarily that guns are, you know, suddenly killing more and more people, but rather that there's just a genuine loss of community among people, and there's sort of like this like postmodern like forced like sociopathism that's kind of like infected everyone to a certain extent. I think like there's a very like genuine lack of sincerity, and that I don't know. I feel like there needs to be a large culture shift where we are more community oriented.
I agree 100%.
Because yeah, I mean that's the main issue is mental health, and like, you know, you lack empathy for other people, obviously, if you're committing mass shootings.
Yeah. And something backed up in our criminal justice class, we talked about how community policing is a key part of policing, having a community to help with the police departments and helping other people is one of the biggest aspects of reducing crime. And going back to what he was saying about we need to bring these communities together for about these mental disabilities, I think it's 100% accurate. Hopefully I said that correctly. Yeah.
I had another thing that I wanted to bring up. I'm not sure if anyone else has anything to say about that in specific. But another point I wanted to kind of bring up was the fact that it's going to be mostly marginalized communities that will be impacted by gun laws, especially like communities of color. And I think that's particularly unfair to like those communities, because I think if there's anyone that needs to like genuinely defend themselves from like the government, you know, like a legitimate tyranny, they would be the first ones that would need to. I mean, in 1980 even there was a you know, like the Philadelphia Department of Police like dropped a bomb on a black like anarchist compound called Move, and the fire spread and killed children that were living in that community. And I mean, I don't know, there's like a case that like those people like probably should have defended themselves. I mean, of course they did, but only to a certain extent. And beyond that, I mean, I think gun laws, I think they're inherently going to affect like the you know, communities of color, because I mean their very basis is like disarming black citizens. Like Ronald Reagan in 1967 passed the Mulford Act, and that was like one of California's first of many gun control measures in a state that is now like very much like strict on guns. But it was written by a Republican and enacted by Ronald Reagan, of course, a Republican. And I mean that and it was in the context of, you know, 1967 civil rights riots, everything like that. The Black Panthers said we need to start policing our own communities because the police are not going to like help us. We need to like arm ourselves, and we need to like police our own communities, make sure our people are safe. And suddenly there was like widespread support from like very I don't know, suspicious people like Don Mulford that were suddenly very pro gun control. And I think that kind of goes to show you that these laws are rooted in racism, to be frank. And I think their result would sort of reflect that.
And to add on to these anti-gun ownership policies, I mean, a lot of these policies, I mean, they're pushed by an agenda, and one of the arguments that they'll say is, when the Constitution was written, guns were different, they were black powdered rifles, and they're nowhere as near as advanced as today's, but in a way, I mean, the argument kind of backfires because their message there is that weapons are more lethal today. But I mean, you could take the argument as well as because the Constitution, when our country was founded in 1776, do you think they had the healthcare that they have today? They didn't have the knowledge. And so if you were shot by a gun by one bullet, it didn't even have to be in anything vital. You may have not died from the bullet, but you would have died from the infection. And so guns were very lethal back then, and so I mean, their argument that guns are more lethal today, I could argue that they were more lethal, back then. They were way more likely to kill you back then. Of course, sorry, I just lost my train of thought, but so if anyone tells you that the Constitution, the Constitution does not, have the view of today's weapons, I mean, it's not only that, but owning a weapon is also not only, kind of a part of our government, in a way of the people. And what I mean by this is, if you take the quote from James Madison, the, known as the author of the Constitution, he stated that a well-regulated militia, his exact quotes, is necessary to secure a free state, and the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And what he's saying here is, if the people are armed, then we don't have to worry about the government becoming corrupt or doing things that are unconstitutional, like what Robert was mentioning earlier, about these bombings and these communities. And, and the state and the ownership, it's not only important, this isn't only important, but it's also a right. And it's a civil right. And some people may get it confused with a civil liberty, which liberties is about freedoms. Some people say like, oh, gun right is a freedom, but no, what James Madison is stating here is that gun ownership is a civil right, and a right deals with equality. And what it means is, in order for the government and the people to be equal, the people need to own guns. Otherwise, we will lose our equality.
Yep. And I think that's a big part of the Second Amendment. It's not just about the type of gun you have, but it's being able to defend yourself from a tyranny government. And that's part of our culture because, I mean, that was enacted because we went against the British government, and that's how we had our American Revolution. So that's just a big part of why we have that Second Amendment. And people also think about, oh, it's the guns. Like, the guns are different. Well, free speech is different. There's so many different things in the Bill of Rights that are different now through time, but the principle is still there. And that's what people are overlooking.
Also, going off of the black powder rifles that we used back then, the citizens had the same type of firearms that the military did, and saying that it was different back then because they were black powder rifles and that times have changed, weapons have gotten deadlier. The government has also these more deadly firearms, so in a way it's still the same, that we're going to be protecting ourselves from them using the same type of weapons that they're going to be using.
True.
fight us if they become tyrannical.
Yep. And to go off that, I'm gonna shoot some shots at people that don't know what the hell they're talking about. Pun intended. So I have 2 videos that are about 2 minutes long each about people that just don't know what the hell they're talking about when it comes to guns. I think that's a very important thing when you're trying to discuss gun laws, is to know what the hell you're talking about. So let me try to figure out how to do the screen recording.
So just maybe I could explain like what they're discussing and talking about.
Yeah. Okay, I think we know what we're trying to get here. That people don't know what the basis of a damn gun is. And I just want to hold on, stop sharing. Okay, and I just kind of want to go into that. There's the whole assault rifle. There's no such thing as an assault rifle. People think that's what the AR stands for, an AR-15. However, the AR and AR-15 stands for Armalite, which is the company that makes that type of gun. And people think, oh, assault rifles are guns that mimic military use weapons, which makes no freaking sense. And there are bans in some states that look militarized, like a pistol grip or a certain length of stock or other things that somewhat look like a military, but that doesn't make any sense at all. And then, like you may have heard in the video, there's a woman talking about a round that has an incendiary device of heat seeking. That's complete bullshit. Incendiary round is just the round that explodes when it hits the impact, but that does absolutely nothing. It's just a cool little round you can have that it's fun to shoot. And again, it goes back to the sport of it. And then also people talk about in another video that I have on here, they say like, oh, certain rounds are an overkill in hunting. Like the rounds used in rifles, they're just an overkill in hunting. However, in this NRA article, which says, so the average round that comes out of a rifle is a .223, which should be only used for medium game, because the .223 is not it's a high speed round, but it doesn't pack a lot of punch behind it. So if you shoot a large animal with a .223, you're actually doing worse because you're harming the animal without killing it, which is actually against the law to do that. So the best way to go hunting is to use a large round and to kill the animal as quickly as possible in the most humane way. So when hunting for large animal, the most calibers used is at least a .308 round, which are pretty big rounds. But even still, the average rounds in rifles are used for medium to small game because the whole point of trying to kill the animal as quickly as possible. So all these people trying to have their facts on guns are just completely bullcrap. And I think if people get their facts straight with guns, then I think we can move in a lot better direction.
All right.
Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, no. You're right. Like there's a severe lack of
knowledge.
Yeah, by all means. There's much else to say other than just sort of wrap this up. And I mean, ultimately, we're just trying to make sure that people are informed about, quote unquote, common sense gun laws, and maybe they're not quite common sense. And I think there should be a lot of political action on both parties to stop this from I don't know, creating some sort of frenzy.
Yeah,
All right.
I
Okay.
agree.
Thank
Okay.
you.
That is. Thanks for listening to our TED Talk.
Yep.
We'll catch you next week. All right.